Hello everyone and welcome in. I'm echohack and this is Maxroll's Crusader Guide. First, a couple of quick notes about the guide itself. This guide is up to date for the launch of the game, so you can be sure that you're prepared for Diablo Immortal launch. You can find the written version of the guide at immortal.maxroll.gg. We'll keep you up to date as we discover new information about the game before and after launch. A new version of this video guide will also be posted for Season 2, so make sure you're subscribed for that. This guide is separated by chapters, so look below and click ahead for the part that you need. Now, without further ado, let's ride. The Crusader charges forward on their glorious celestial steed, leading your party with high area of effect damage, incredible speed, and party-wide buffs. As a Crusader, you will quickly crush groups of enemies, as almost every skill at your disposal excels at AoE-based DPS. As for strengths, Crusaders are a melee and AoE damage-based class, with the fastest overall movement speed in the game. Most Crusader builds rely on draw and quarter as their main skill to move around and deal damage. The primary attack given by draw and quarter, when combined with legendary items such as Besieger and Bladed Gem Bow, enable it alone to demolish waves of enemies. If damage becomes a problem, the Crusader has defensive skills such as Punish for improved block chance, or Conjuration of Light to make you and your party invulnerable for a short duration. In a party, Crusaders can use Holy Banner, giving all nearby party members a 100% critical hit chance for a short duration. Crusaders also fill a party role as a scout, dealing AoE damage to trash mobs, triggering events, and pulling enemies together. In PvP, Crusaders have an impressive kit of stuns, interrupts, and dashes, such as Sacred Chain, Shield Charge, and Falling Sword with Little Lance. Overall, Crusaders are a top-tier choice for their high AoE damage, incredible movement speed, impressive defensive skills, effective party-wide buffs, and a wide array of PvP skills. But with strengths come weaknesses, and the Crusader has an over-reliance on draw and quarter. This exposes some of the weaknesses of the class. This skill is vulnerable to stuns and interrupts, causing you to immediately lose the entire duration. Most builds with draw and quarter rely on casting other skills before casting it, further decreasing your damage during stuns and interrupts for your entire build. Now finally, using draw and quarter for movement means that when it is on cooldown, you have no options for escape. Since you're a melee class, relying on it for escape can make it easy to become trapped and make it difficult to dodge ranged attacks when it's on cooldown. Crusaders have poor single target damage and high cooldown duration skills. This leads to many situations where all of your skills on cooldown, leaving you with only your lackluster primary skill. As a result, certain bosses can be difficult to kill in challenge rifts. Finally, as a scout for the party, you'll be put in situations where you must push far ahead in order to advance a dungeon. This can mean giving up a portion of loot that drops in the ground. This can result in a minor loss in salvage materials compared to the rest of your party. Now, what to expect as a Crusader? For strengths, high AoE damage, a wide array of PvP skills, effective party-wide buffs, impressive defensive skills, and incredible movement speed. For weaknesses, you have long skilled cooldowns, difficult to avoid damage, low single target damage, PvP relying on only one playstyle, and underwhelming primary attacks. Starting your Crusader off on the right foot is key in order to make your character as powerful as possible. First of all, you'll want to find better equipment for your character. Your bag will flash when you pick up better equipment. Turn on auto pickup for all item types and settings, and periodically return to town to salvage. Unlock and use draw and quarter at level 15. Now, level 15 is a very important level. This is when you unlock your mobility skill. Remember that when you're using draw and quarter, you can hold down the primary attack button to attack while moving at the same time. When you get the battle pass to level 10, you can claim a legendary item. This gives you an early legendary item that will increase your character's power. Finding normal and legendary gems can boost your character early on. Hidden layers drop normal gems, and if you use a crest, Elder Rifts have a chance to drop important legendary gems. Make sure once you reach level 41 and finish Biofin that you unlock the Heliquary. This has an important battle pass quest that allows you to acquire Scoria, allowing you to progress the in-game 8-player raids. All right, let's go into the meat of this guide, the builds. Now, note for all of these builds that set items and starter legendary gems will be mentioned after the build section. because they're nearly the same for all of the builds. The first build is our solo build, Steed and Slaughter. Now, Steed and Slaughter allows you to deal all of your damage while moving, while riding a glorious celestial steed. You'll slaughter enemy groups so fast that you'll need to plan routes around how fast you can pick up loot. Since you will never stop moving, chaining massacre bonuses together is easy. More massacre bonuses means more experience points, and faster monster kills means more loot. Now, moving from objective to objective with this build simply becomes a question: how many enemies do I want to kill along the way? First, let's take a look at our skills. We have Punish. This is our primary attack. You're going to use this for filler damage when all of your other skills are on cooldown. The ultimate is also useful for single target damage on bosses or difficult to kill enemies. Draw and Quarter. This is this build's main damage dealer and movement skill. Make sure you're holding down your primary attack while moving to deal extra damage and trigger primary and secondary family bonuses. Fallen Sword. Use Little Lance for extra mobility when Draw and Quarter is on cooldown and for single target damage. Consecration. This does extra damage in an AoE centered around you, even while moving with Draw and Quarter. Make sure you use this before mounting up. Spinning Shield. This is a large AoE damage attack that can also move with Draw and Quarter. Save charges for when you need massive burst AoE damage. Now let's take a look at the legendary items. First, we have our head slot, the Many-Eyed Aegis. Your Consecration now moves with you and deals damage over 6 seconds. For shoulders, we have Civ Kit's Advantage. Draw and Quarter duration is increased by 30%. For our main hand, we have Little Lance. Falling Sword instead causes you to surge forward with your sword up to 3 times, damaging all enemies in your path. For our chest, we have Besieger. Draw and Quarter periodically calls down a bombardment to nearby enemies. For our leg slot, we have Bladed Jambo. Draw and Quarter's mount becomes a fiery steed that burns the ground and enemies, but no longer drags enemies. And finally, for our offhand, we have the Pavice of 10 Wings. Spinning Shield now spirals around you and does not return. For gameplay, it's important to note that speed farming builds, or solo builds, are made to move fast and destroy groups of enemies quickly. You'll want to start your rotation with Consecration and charge forward with Draw and Quarter. Hold down the primary attack button whenever you're moving with Draw and Quarter. After Draw and Quarter's duration is done, dash forward with Falling Sword to your next destination. If you spend all of your cooldowns and you run into a tough enemy, use Punish to deal damage before beginning your rotation once again. All right, next up we have our group build, Holy Fire. Holy Fire is a support build for group farming that enhances your entire group's damage with automatic critical hits from Holy Banner and the incredibly powerful Holy Fire damage from Conjuration of Light. Draw and Quarter also serves as a scouting and support tool. Finally, use Spinning Shield and Holy Banner to eradicate bosses quickly. Let's take a look at our skills. First up, we have Punish, which is our primary attack. We're going to use this for filler damage when all other skills are on cooldown. The ultimate's also useful for single target damage on bosses. Next, we have Draw and Quarter. Unlike other builds, this is mostly going to be for scouting purposes. You're going to hold down your primary attack while moving to deal extra damage. Third, we have Conjuration of Light. This does close-ranged AoE damage and is one of the main damage dealers in this build. Next up, we have Holy Banner. This does a large group buff centered on your character, boosting all of your party members' critical hit chance by 100% that are in the range of the buff. Focus on keeping your entire party in the area of effect rather than purely doing damage with your other abilities. Sometimes staying alive and allowing other party members to deal damage safely at range in this effect is smarter than actually trying to deal damage yourself. Now finally, we have Spinning Shield. This deals insane amounts of single target damage by dropping your shields on top of bosses and mini bosses, especially when Holy Banner is up. All right, let's take a look at the legendary items. For our head slot, we have Arrow Keeper. Holy Banner is now centered on your character. Also, since the banner is now gone, it has the hidden effect of keeping the critical hit chance bonus up at all times, instead of allowing the fragile banner to die to enemy attacks. For shoulders, we have Wind Blessed Pauldrons. Conjuration of Light duration is increased by 30%. For our main hand, you can put any weapon you want in there. There's no restrictions. For our chest slot, Justice Without Favor. This is really important. It allows Conjuration of Light to surround you and your allies with Holy Fire that continually damages nearby enemies, but no longer prevents damage. Now you might think this doesn't do that much damage, but Note that you're not seeing your allies' damage numbers when they do damage with this buff. For our pants slot, we have Bladed Gembow. Drawn Quarter will now leave behind a trail of fiery in its wake. Lure enemies to run behind you to deal damage on the move. And finally, for our offhand, we have Sinkhole Cross. Spinning Shield hovers at a location, damaging enemies and decreasing their movement speed. Now for gameplay, you're going to use Drawn Quarter to speed through areas and deal damage to most enemies. When your group is together, use Holy Banner and then immediately pop Conjuration of Light to blast down enemy groups quickly. On bosses, use Holy Banner, then Conjuration of Light, then all 3 charges of Spinning Shield. Watch as the boss dies from insane amounts of damage. For our Challenge Rift build, you're going to use Light's Fury. Light's Fury is a solo build for pushing extremely difficult challenge rifts. Draw and Quarter serves as your primary movement and positioning tool. Consecrate and Falling Sword enable you to deal a massive amount of AoE damage at range without becoming trapped in melee range. Finally, use Spinning Shield to eradicate bosses quickly. For skills, we have Punish as our primary attack, used for filler damage when all other skills are on cooldown. The ultimate's also useful for single target damage on bosses. Draw and Quarter. Hold down your primary attack while moving to deal extra damage and trigger primary, secondary, and family bonuses. Consecration. This does extra damage in an AoE centered on you, even while moving with Drawn Quarter. Use this before mounting up. Falling Sword. Target groups from a distance and allow damage over time to erode enemies. Spinning Shield. Deal insane amounts of single target damage. Use this after grouping enemies together or for dealing insane damage to the boss. Now let's take a look at our legendary items. For our head slot, you can use any legendary item here except for Many-Eyed Aegis. You want to make sure that your Consecrate is not sticky on you. For your shoulder slot, use Sivkit's Advantage. Drawn Quarter duration is increased by 30%. For your main hand, use Tumult. Falling Sword now summons a storm of blades around it, continually damaging all nearby enemies, but can no longer be activated again for movement. With Tumult, essentially Falling Sword becomes a second Consecration. For your chest slot, use Besieger. Drawn Quarter periodically calls down a bombardment to nearby enemies. For your pants slot, use Bladed Gembow. Drawn Quarter will now leave behind a trail of fiery in its wake. Lure enemies to run behind you to deal damage on the move. For our offhand, we're going to use Sinkhole Cross. Spinning Shield hovers at a location, damaging enemies and decreasing their movement speed. Now for our gameplay. Challenge Rift builds maximize survivability and damage, giving a well-rounded set of skills. You'll want to use Drawn Quarter to speed through areas that are empty and deal damage to most enemies. Your fiery trail will be important for damaging enemies as you group them together. Make sure you save Spinning Shield for large groups of enemies and on the boss for when it's stationary. Use Consecration and Falling Sword from a distance to deal damage while dodging attacks. For our Crusader PvP build, we have Stun Stampede. Stun Stampede focuses on the Crusader's highly mobile playstyle while maximizing enemy stuns. Hold Drawn Quarter until you can use its full duration on top of an enemy. Instead, choose to travel with Falling Sword. Use Spinning Shield to create space and soften enemies at range, and chase with Falling Sword to kill nearby dead enemies. For our skills, first up we have Punish. This is our primary attack. You want to use this for filler damage when all of your other skills are in cooldown. Next we have Draw and Quarter. Hold down your primary attack while moving to deal extra damage and trigger primary, secondaries, and family bonuses. Use this on top of enemies to chain stun them. Third, we have Condemn. Save this as an interrupt or a delay for enemies that are running away. Falling Sword. Use this for mobility and to chase nearly dead foes. Spinning Shield. Soften enemies at a distance and use to zone out other enemies from entering objectives. Now let's take a look at our legendary items. First up, for our head slot, you can use anything you want here. No restrictions. For shoulders, use Sivkit's Advantage. Drawn Quarter duration is increased by 30%. For our main hand, we're going to use Little Lance. Falling Sword instead causes you to surge forward with your sword up to 3 times, damaging all enemies in your path. For our chest slot, we're going to use Iron Suzerain. Condemn now continuously draws enemies towards you. For our pants slot, Cavalier's Courtwear. Drawn Quarter now damages enemies when you run over them and knocks them away, but it no longer drags enemies. For our offhand, we're going to use the Previce of 10 Wings. Spinning Shield now spirals around you and does not return. Now in general PvP builds, sacrifice raw damage for additional stun and mobility. First of all, save, draw, and quarter. It might be tempting to use this as a gap closer, but this is your primary damage skill, not your gap closer. Instead, you're going to gap close with falling sword. You're going to get behind your foe if you can. Use spinning shield to keep chasing foes at a distance. Mix in punish whenever you can. You'll get some extra block chance. And finally, you'll want to finish low health enemies and chase with falling sword. We have set items and we have our starter legendary gems. These are recommendations for all builds. In general, Crusader has only 1 or 2 options when it comes to set items and starter legendary gems. So first of all, for our set items, we're going to use Windloft Perfection. This is the best in-game set for Crusaders. It scales incredibly well with our Fast and Blast playstyle, and it gap closes faster in PvP situations than nearly anything else. The 3 set bonus for Windloft Perfection is movement speed increased by 10%. The 6 set bonus for Windloft Perfection is for every 5% increase to your movement speed, you deal 1% increased damage, up to a maximum damage increase of 14%. Now let's take a look at our starter legendary gems. You'll want to start your build and your character off with these to obtain these easy to obtain 1 and 2 star legendary gems. First, and the most powerful starter legendary gem in the game is Everlasting Torment. This deals incredible damage over time after a critical hit. For a simple 1-star legendary gem, this packs a huge punch. Next up, we have Fervent Fang. This does fantastic single target damage. It can easily be acquired from the battle pass, and it doesn't rely on luck from crests. Third, we have Berserker's Eye. This provides increased damage in nearly all cases, especially if you're willing to take a little bit more damage. This trade-off works well for almost any Crusader build. Next up, we have Lightning Core. This does direct damage to an enemy group, often wiping them out in the process. Now, while the damage is infrequent, it's useful for taking down larger targets and for burst DPS in PvP. Next up, we have Seled's Weakening. This gives a frequent damage boost anytime you kill elites, making it have a natural synergy with many Crusader builds. And finally, we have Chain Death. This gives solid damage boost, especially in AoE situations. As a Crusader, you're going to be in an AoE situation almost all the time. Next up, let's look at our best in slot legendary gems. Legendary gems provide incredible stat bonuses and unique effects. They're found as a reward after completing an Elder Rift that's enhanced with a legendary crest. Many of them are also crafted using runes and platinum at the jeweler in Westmarch. First up, and the most powerful legendary gem in the game, is Blood-Soaked Jade. This provides a massive damage and movement speed boost in a single package. Second, Seeping Bile. This has a poison that's devastating in large densities like Elder and Challenge Rifts. Any AoE ability will trigger it over and over again, making this one of the most impactful legendary gems in the game. Next up, we have Blessing of the Worthy. This is a Crusader's best friend because you're constantly in melee range of enemies. Any damage taken activates the devastating damage every 15 seconds, obliterating anything nearby. Fourth, we have Howler's Call. This blasts your enemies from incredible range and is triggered by any primary attack, including the primary attack from draw and quarter. This adds an important ranged attack to your arsenal that triggers off of your already very stacked rotation. Now, fifth up, we have Frozen Heart. This provides great damage reduction versus ranged enemies. It's hard to beat percentage-based damage reduction in Diablo Immortal, so we take this. Sixth, and finally, we have the Chip of Stone Flesh. This has a chance to petrify a target and gives you a damage boost on top of it. Petrifying enemies can keep you alive in a challenge rift or secure a kill in PvP, making this an incredible choice. All right, let's talk about Crusader's skills. Skills are core to your character and a main way for your character to defend yourself and to destroy enemies. Characters can equip up to 5 skills at once, including 1 primary attack and 4 skills. Primary attacks have no cooldown and fill your ultimate bar when used. When the ultimate bar is full, you can cast the ultimate ability. Skills automatically gain ranks as you level up and can be swapped anytime out of combat. You can also gain charms, which add additional bonuses that enhance a skill's power. Legendary items modify a skill's power, changing its behavior or enhancing its stats. You can only equip 1 legendary item per slot, so be careful when planning your build. Now finally, once you obtain a rank 10 legendary gem, legendary items can be awakened, granting additional bonuses. Let's look at the Crusader skills in detail to understand how they work. Punish. Strike an enemy for damage and gain hardened senses, increasing your block chance by 30% for 2 seconds. This skill is unlocked at level 1 and has no cooldown. Its ultimate is Counterattack Storm. Enhance Punish for 12 seconds, striking all enemies in front of you, increasing its damage per hit, and increasing its block chance bonus. You also gain a shield that absorbs damage equal to 20% of your maximum life for 3 seconds. Sacred Fire. Ignite the air with holy flames from your weapon, dealing damage to an enemy and 25% as much to all enemies in front of you. This is unlocked at level 34 and has no cooldown. Its ultimate is Burning Heart. Enhance Sacred Fire for 12 seconds, increasing damage done. Each enemy killed grants 1% increased Sacred Fire damage for 240 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. You also gain a shield that absorbs damage. Condemn. Build up a massive explosion, dealing damage to all nearby enemies after 3 seconds. Activate again to detonate early, but for less damage in a smaller radius. This is unlocked at level 47 and has a cooldown of 9 seconds. Conjuration of Light. Call down a beam of holy light from the heavens, protecting you and all nearby allies with damage immunity for 3 seconds. This is unlocked at level 50 and has a cooldown of 25.8 seconds. Consecration. Consecrate the ground around you, dealing damage to all nearby enemies over 6 seconds. This is unlocked at level 20 and has a cooldown of 15 seconds. Draw and Quarter. Mount a Celestial Warhorse for 6 seconds, dispelling all movement impairing effects, increasing your movement speed by 65%, and replacing your primary attack with a strike. Holy Chains will bind up to 8 nearby monsters and drag them with you as you ride. This is unlocked at level 15 and has a cooldown of 16 seconds. Falling Sword. Impale your holy sword at a location where it deals damage over 5 seconds to all nearby enemies. Activate again to launch yourself into the heavens and come crashing down at the sword's location, dealing damage to all nearby enemies and retrieving the sword. This is unlocked at level 8 and has a cooldown of 10 seconds. Holy Banner. Plant a holy banner that inspires nearby allies for 11.2 seconds, increasing critical hit chance to 100%, but decreasing critical hit damage to 135% instead of double. Critical hit chance over 100% will grant up to 50% additional critical hit damage. The banner's life is also equal to your life. This is unlocked at level 38 and has a cooldown of 24 seconds. Judgment. Pass Judgment on all enemies within an area, dealing damage and slowing them by 50% for 3 seconds. The center of the area will explode after a short time, dealing damage to all nearby enemies and stunning them for 3 seconds. This is unlocked at level 28 and has a cooldown of 12 seconds. Sacred Chain. Throw holy chains that bounce between enemies, striking up to 6 targets and dealing damage to each. The chains stun enemies for 8 seconds, but they are dispelled by damage. The duration is reduced to 3 seconds on players. This is unlocked at level 44 and has a cooldown of 14 seconds. Shield Charge. Charge forward with your shield, pushing all enemies in your path and inflicting damage. Enemies colliding with terrain will be stunned for 3 seconds. This is unlocked at level 41 and has a cooldown of 12 seconds. Shield Glare. Light erupts from your shield, dealing damage and blinding all enemies in front of you for 3 seconds. Players will only be blinded if they are facing you. Spinning Shield. Hurl a spinning shield, inflicting damage to all enemies in its path. The shield will return to you, pulling enemies in its path to you and dealing additional damage. It has a maximum of 3 charges. Players can only be affected by spinning shield once every 3 seconds. This is unlocked at level 1 and has a cooldown of 12 seconds. Sweep Attack. Sweep a mystical flail through enemies in front of you, dealing damage. Charging longer increases range and damage. When fully charged, Sweep Attack will also knock enemies away. This is unlocked at level 1 and has a cooldown of 9 seconds. Finally, Legendaries. Let's take a look at every legendary available in the game for Crusader. This section is for your reference to help you plan out your own builds. Let's begin. For the Helm slot, we have Glower of the Recluse. When an enemy is blinded, immobilized, or stunned, your sweep attack deals 15% more damage. Many-Eyed Aegis. Your consecration now moves with you. Redeemer's Medal. Shield glare radius increased by 20%. Sudden Velation. Holy Banner instead plants a holy beacon that continually damages enemies with holy light. Retribution Ornament. Holy Banner is replaced with a holy statue that forces all nearby enemies to attack it. Arrow Keeper, the inspiration from Holy Banner, now moves with you. Quester's Mien, shield charge maximum charges increased by 1. Now for the shoulder slot. Cradle of Pebbles, Judgment instead summons a Guardian of Justice to fight for you. Barbed Counsel, Judgment now implodes after a short delay, drawing all nearby enemies to its center, but no longer slows movement or stuns. Faith Ascendant deals 10% increased damage for a few seconds after using either stage of Falling Sword. Sivkit's Advantage, draw and quarter duration increased by 30%. Spine of the Adversary, Sacred Chain now also causes chained enemies to take a percentage of all damage taken by any other chained enemy, but no longer stuns. Public Penance, Sacred Chain now throws frozen chains that deal more damage and do not break from damage, but have a shorter duration. Wind Blessed Pauldrons, Conjuration of Light duration increased by 30%. Now let's look at the chest slot. Springback Chain, spinning shield damage increased by 10%. Feather Mail Coat, judgment damage increased by 10%. Fortress Hermetic, consecration radius increased by 20%. Besieger, draw and quarter periodically calls down a bombardment for 692 damage to nearby enemies. Hungerfire Chitin, shield charge also unleashes a shockwave at its destination, dealing 682 damage to all nearby enemies. Iron Suzerain, Condemn now continuously drags enemies towards you. Justice Without Favor, Conjuration of Light surrounds you and your allies with holy fire that continually damages all nearby enemies, but no longer prevents damage. Now let's look at the leg slot. Squire's Trues, you can now carry a passenger during draw and quarter. Cavalier's Courtwear, draw and quarter now damages enemies when you run over them and knocks them away, but it no longer drags enemies. Bladed Gembeau, draw and quarters mount becomes a fiery steed that burns the ground and enemies, but no longer drags enemies. Tactics and Secrets, shield glare damage increased by 10%. Pillager's Greaves, shield charge damage increased, and shield charge can be charged up to further increase damage. Shield Swath, shield charge now charges to a location where it can form a shielded circle that enemies and their projectiles cannot cross. Permanent Reproach, condemn radius increased by 20%. Now let's look at the main hand slot. Proof from On High, falling sword now chains enemies to a location and pulls them to you when activated again. Tumult, falling sword now summons a storm of blades around it, continually damaging all nearby enemies, but can no longer be activated again for movement. Little Lance, falling sword instead causes you to surge forward with your sword up to 3 times, damaging all enemies in your path. Air Splitter, falling sword instead unleashes a shockwave that can be charged up to increase range and damage. Long Palm, sweep attack now strikes all nearby enemies. Closing Jaws, sweep attack now pulls all enemies it strikes to you. Carawan's Catch, sweep attack now consumes energy to continually damage all nearby enemies while you move. Now let's look at the offhand slot. Sinkhole Cross, spinning shield hovers at a location, damaging enemies and decreasing their movement speed. Pavice of 10 Wings, spinning shield now spirals around you and does not return. Pouncing Shield, spinning shield now bounces between several enemies instead of returning to you. Bowyer's Remorse, spinning shield now explodes when it strikes an enemy instead of returning, damaging all nearby enemies and knocking them away. Zaynula's Last Hymn, consecration also slows enemy movement by 30%. Constant Scrutiny, shield glare now blinds and damages all enemies around you. Bone Bearer, shield glare now consumes energy to reflect a beam of light that continually damages enemies in a direction, but no longer blinds enemies. That's it for this Crusader guide for Diablo Immortal Season 1. Are you prepared for DI launch? What's your favorite Crusader build? Tell me in the comments down below. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Peace!